There are two types of woke progressives, broadly speaking. The first is the atheist woke progressive. Now, this woke progressive has no higher power, no religion, no God, and thinks he or she is completely free of such superstitious belief in a power beyond the material universe. However, the problem is the woke progressive, like all humans, will still have a spiritual impulse, will need some sort of spiritual direction, the spirituality within, belief in something higher than themselves, with a goal for their life that's beyond mere material acquisition, that's still going to be in them. So it has to be expressed somehow, and it always goes into extremist politics almost every time. And you see this in the atheist woke progressives. They have made their movement their religion. A lot of people have pointed this out, and it's pretty obvious. But I want to suggest that it's not merely religion, because religion, generally speaking, when it's moderate, when it's mild, it's healthy, it's good for society. See, what we're dealing with in woke progressives who are of the atheist stripe, they are absolutely, positively part of a fundamentalist religion, an extremist religion. They're like charismatics. They're like the snake handlers of politics. They're out of their mind. They're crazy. They believe in insane things. Their conception of what is right and wrong is completely convoluted and inverted. And you could essentially call them, and I've made other videos on this, they're so ridiculously fundamentalist in their religious take. They're so militant that it's almost Satanism. So it's Satanism in the sense that if you think about what Satanism is symbolically, it's the worshiping of the lower and the denigrating, the bashing of the higher, the lowering of the higher. So it's worshiping falsehood instead of truth, division instead of unity. And just like all demonic entities, they're going to use the words of the noble attributes or talk in a way that seems to suggest they represent what is noble and what is good. They'll use justice, they mean revenge, right? That's just an example. So they're inverted. That's in every fundamentalist religious group, you find that inversion. In radical Islam, you see killing as a way to go to heaven rather than saving life and being compassionate towards life as a way to go to heaven. God commands you to commit violence rather than to spread peace, right? And other religions can do the same thing. Various cults around the world do that as well. So that's the first type of progressive. It's the atheist progressive, and they become hyper religious in their politics. The second type of woke progressive that I've seen are people who believe in God, people who are spiritual, people who are, I would say, a lot of New Agers can become woke progressives. I first saw this back during the Iraq War. You talk to these people who were New Agers, practiced unconditional love, but you brought up the Iraq War, and they'd suddenly they'd just get vicious, and fangs would come out. And everyone who supported the war, anyone who was fighting in the war, were essentially, demons, and they would spit on them if they could. And he felt this like vitriol. And it's like, well, it's very easy to be kind and loving to people you agree with, but what about people you don't agree with? Do you have any love for them? They don't. So these people essentially are actually religious woke progressives, or spiritual woke progressives, meaning they believe in a higher power, they believe in God, they're not atheists. And what they do is they try to take spiritual values, and their spiritual practice becomes political. So instead of prayer, not to say they don't pray as we generally understand it, but instead of prayer, a lot of the time what they'll do is they'll protest. That becomes a form of prayer. And so what they try to do is funnel compassion, unconditional love, agape into politics. And this does two things to them. One, it makes them extremely gullible, because they have selective compassion, even though they're trying to be, universally compassionate. They have selective compassion, and they tend to have compassion, not for the down and out, but compassion for dangerous people, dangerous ideas. And they'll have no cash bail or something like that. Somebody will commit triple homicide and they'll let them out after a weekend. So it's compassion like that grows in grotesque proportions and is directed the wrong way, or at least in the wrong style. It's totally okay to have compassion for criminals, behind bars. You can like try to make their lives better behind bars. You can try to help them correct themselves behind bars. That's how passion's expressed in sane people. Unconditional passion would be expressed in a sane person, compassionate for all of society, that this person has to be off the street, and then you do what you can for them while they're in prison. That's real compassion. But woke progressives, their compassion is the system made somebody do something, therefore let them out of the system. Of course, the compassion only extends in certain directions. It'll never be extended to a conservative or someone like that. So beyond this hyper-compassion making them gullible, it also seems to block out a certain... It makes them unconscious to the nastiness they have for other people. So at the same time they're trying to be unconditionally loving, it's odd because they're dangerous because they have no wisdom, but it's also odd because they become like the opposite of compassionate. They're filled with hate and rage. Like they really, really dislike Trump, MAGA people, conservatives, Republicans. Like it's visceral. They hate them. They're run by hate. And they become sort of political demons, right? And it's odd that they also lose a sense of truth. Like they're propagandized beyond measure. I'm somebody who's not a Trump fan. I just don't have Trump derangement syndrome, right? I don't like Trump. I won't vote for him. But I know most people in MAGA are decent people, right? The one thing I've always said about MAGA folks, I can disagree with them. Afterwards, we can go hang out. The woke progressive, you disagree with them, they'll end your friendship. It's happened to me numerous times in New York City. And I'm not even like a hard right-winger. I'm just like center-right, slightly conservative. And I've lost friendships. When I would try to speak, certain people would say, nope, I don't even want to hear your politics anymore. Because we had to work together. And they could talk about politics with anybody else. They wouldn't talk about it with me. I was the only one who disagreed with them. You could feel the hatred some of them had for me. So those are the two types of woke progressives. The atheist woke progressive, who doesn't know that they have a spiritual impulse and it's being directed through politics. And that spiritual impulse is so denied in them, it becomes a fundamentalist religion. And a fundamentalist religion starts to invert good and evil. And once that happens, you're actually political Satanists. And then you have the woke progressives who are spiritual, and they absolutely try to take the values of like mercy, unconditional love, justice, and force it through their politics and express it through politics, and their spiritual practice becomes politics. Ironically, they also end up flipping it, and instead of compassionate, they become naive and vicious, and instead of justice, they actually start seeking revenge. So it's not good, it's not healthy. Now, I will say, if you study the F word as a political movement, I can't say it because certain apps ban it, but you see something similar in right-wing extremist movements as well. Of course you do, because we all know the horseshoe theory. I focus on woke progressives more often than not, probably because I'm conservative and I lean right, and I think that's the bigger threat. I think it's the bigger threat because I've seen it in my university. I've seen it in corporations. I've had friends who have been canceled in a variety of industries or attempted to be canceled. And if you study history, you can't help but be alarmed by the echoes of faint hints of like the French Revolution and Maoism and the Red Guards, right? It's not there yet. But whenever you see these faint echoes of that, no matter how faint, you got to point it out. And you got to get rid of those things while they're still small. I wish people on the left, traditional liberals, had done this when woke was coming on the scene, kind of snuffed this out, but they didn't. They let it grow. And I'll say this. In the 80s and 90s, there were atheist liberals who knew politics was a good way for them to express their need to help, that and charity, and they weren't fundamentalists. They knew what they were doing. They knew politics was filling a void in them, and they were decent people. And I still know spiritual people who are like traditional liberals, and they do use politics to express some religious belief, right? But they do it in a healthy way, in a measured way, right? God is still God, and politics is still politics.